Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda. It's Tuesday and it's time for another Tag Tuesday. I'm actually doing this video quite a bit ahead. So the whole Victorian Literature Journey Tag, which is the one I'm doing now, that may already be passé by the time you see it. Just know that when I'm filming it, everyone's still doing it. I try to keep my tags to Tuesdays so that I can devote other days to other things. So it's just the way it goes. But I'm doing the Victorian Literature Journey Tag, which was started by Roz at Scally Dandelion about the books. I'm sorry, Roz. I have trouble saying your channel sometimes. And Tilly. And then I was not really officially tagged, but the person who convinced me to do it, because she tagged everybody who hasn't done it, which includes me, most convincing was Angelia at Read and Reread. So if you have seen the Shakespeare Journey Tag, which I avoided doing this year, next year I might do it because next year I'll be into my Shakespeare Journey Tag. So maybe I will do that one next year. But these questions are very, they're adapted from that tag. So there you go. There are 9 prompts. The first one was, what was your first experience reading Victorian literature and how was it? So my initial answer to this one was, it was Great Expectations my sophomore year in high school. But that's wrong because I watched Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading and she said hers was Beatrix Potter. And I was like, yes, I read Beatrix Potter as a kid. Disclaimer, I hated Beatrix Potter as a kid. It freaked me out. Like, the rabbit wasn't very nice and bad things were going to happen to it. And they're kind of morality tales. And so, like, I didn't like that. Like, I didn't want bad things to happen. I didn't want people to misbehave because I still have a lot of empathy for characters. So, like, it would be very stressful for me as, like, a little child to, like, read Beatrix Potter. Side note, though, several years ago, so when my kids were little, like toddler age, the Beatrix Potter estate gave permission to Emma Thompson, yes, that Emma Thompson, to write more tales of Peter Rabbit. And those books are awesome. They are actual, like, stories with plots. And the books are, they're picture books, but there's like lines and lines of prose. You know, the Beatrix Potter books are the little tiny ones. These are big ones. And they came with a CD in the back of Emma Thompson herself, who's fantastic reading them. So I do like those. But then Angelia pointed out that she had like a children's book of poems or children's book of verse, which was also, and I had that book too. However, I don't have a lot of memories of that book. I just know I had it. So I guess I'm going to have to go with Beatrix Potter for that one. And, you know, that probably also began my stressful experiences with some books. 2, has the reading of a Victorian book ever brought you to tears? If so, tell us more. So, how are we defining Victorian literature? If we're talking about British literature during the Victorian period, then no. That being said, adaptations, for example, any adaptation I see of Jane Eyre, I cry when Helen Burns dies. I don't cry in the book, but in the adaptation. But if we're expanding the definition of Victorian literature to books anywhere that were written during that time, then there's Little Women and Beth. It's so sad. I like even thinking about it, I'm starting to tear up. Beth dying. Beth, like, I will call people a Beth. I had a friend recently, like a year or so ago, who died before his time, and he was like I'm gonna start crying. He was the sweetest person in the world. And to me, I was like, he's a Beth. He's just too good to stay in our world. So yeah, I would say Little Women. And okay, now I'm getting all verklempt. Okay, I'm better now. Okay, question 3. Are there any people who have played a significant role in your Victorian literature journey? Yes. So I can't remember one of their names though. One was my sophomore year English teacher who was teaching us when we read Great Expectations. And that was, you know, your sophomore year English is very much like a survey. So we did Great Expectations and then we moved on really quickly. If I remember correctly, he read from A Christmas Carol too. I can't remember. I had, you know, in high school, I had 4 English teachers. 2 were fantastic, and he was one of them. And the other one was my American Lit teacher. And just the way he taught it made it very accessible because it seemed like it was so intimidating when I was 15 years old, but he made it possible for me to believe I could read it. And the second one is a professor, Professor Morse from William & Mary. I believe she's still at William & Mary, in fact. That's where I went to school. And I did a summer term at Cambridge, and she was one of the professors who went, and she taught the Bronte. I did 2 classes with her, the Brontes and the British social novel. So basically all Victorian literature. And that woman is super, super excited about both those things. And just her excitement just leached onto you. And oh man, I loved it. And she was with us. We went to places like Haworth. You know, she would like run up the hill. It's like, let's go look at Haworth. And she would lead us through the graveyard and everything. So she really brought Victorian literature to life. Question 4. Do you have a favorite film or TV adaptation of a Victorian book? And what one would you like to see made? So no, because at least I can't think of anything. And that is because, oh, nope, I'm wrong. I am wrong. That's right, I do have a favorite. A Muppets Christmas Carol. That is the best Christmas Carol adaptation. I don't care what anyone says. A Muppets Christmas Carol. Now, the reason I had a little bit of a problem thinking about that is 1, I don't think of Muppets as Victorian, but A Christmas Carol is Victorian. 2, when you say Victorian, I immediately go to the Brontes, and I have never seen an adaptation of a Bronte novel that lived up to my expectations. There was one of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall that came out in the 90s that I remember thinking was pretty good. That's it. Like, I have not liked any production of Jane Eyre, even though I cry out every time Helen Burns dies. I've not liked any adaptation of Jane Eyre I've seen. I have not seen a good production of Wuthering Heights, any of those. I saw one production of Wuthering Heights, which was really weird because it had Sinead O'Connor as Emily Bronte in it. I was like, what? What is going on here? Anyway, yeah, they put Emily Bronte into the book, and she was played by Sinead O'Connor. Rest in peace. So yes, that's why I initially said no, and then I remembered the Muppets. Now, as for one I'd like to see made, I would love to see a good production, movie making gods, here you go, a good production of Wuthering Heights. And I think the way to do that is to tell it as a horror novel. It's a ghost story. Because Wuthering Heights, I think a lot of people don't like Wuthering Heights. And I get it. I hated Wuthering Heights the first time I read it. And then I read it again and I realized, oh wait, these people are terrible and they're doing terrible things. That's supposed to happen. And then my dark and twisty side came out and I ended up really liking it. But I do think that Wuthering Heights is a horror story. And if someone could actually make it a really classy, quality horror movie, it would be wonderful. And I'm probably the only person who thinks that, but there you go. That's one I'd like to see. Which character in Victorian literature most resembles you or you identify with the most? So everyone says Jane Eyre, and so I'm not going to say it. Although that's really my answer. Even though I don't identify with her at all, we have nothing in common. But I'm going to say Helen Graham from The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And I just, mostly because that story that's my favorite Bronte novel. It was Jane Eyre, and then I was blown away by The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. But also, that is a book that comes to me a lot. I read it, college, young adult, single. I've read it several times, but I haven't read it since I became a parent. But I think about it as a parent, and that will come into play a little bit later. So that is the one that really stuck with me. And while I don't really identify, I don't see myself in Helen Graham, I do see her almost as a role model in some ways. So that's my answer. So the next question actually is going to be the one I'm talking about. Do you have a favorite moment, scene, or line from Victorian literature? Tell us about it or read it to us. So I had to look this up because I couldn't remember it exactly, but this is from The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And I remember the gist of it, but I had to look it up. So it's on my screen. I'm going to look it up over here. And this is Helen talking about her philosophy of parenting, which is one I 100% agree with. And here it is. If you would have your son, put child in, if you would have your son to walk honorably through the world, you must not attempt to clear the stones from his path, but teach him to walk firmly over them, not insist upon leading him by the hand, but let him learn to go alone. That I did have to look up the exact wording of it, but that passage has stuck with me since I first read this in college to now, where I'm now parents. I have 2 teenagers. So, wow, that's the power of good written literature. Does any Victorian literature intimidate you? If so, what and why? There was a time when I would have said Middlemarch, but then I read Middlemarch. I think I would still say Middlemarch, even though I've read it. I did not really enjoy it. And from everyone who talks about it, I think I should have enjoyed it. So I feel like I've missed something with it, which means I'm going to have to do a reread at some point. I think that's a book maybe like Wuthering Heights, where you need to take a couple times to read it, but it's much longer than Wuthering Heights. So, you got to work that one in. But really, when you get to the really big books, I mean, it's just size really that intimidates me on a lot of them. Villette and Shirley are a little bit long, but other than that, the Bronte novels are not super long. Dickens can be super long, but not all of his books are super long. So really, it's like if I look at it and it's big and heavy, I'm intimidated. However, a way I found out around this, and this has almost become a necessity for me, is if I read it on my Kobo, I don't know how big it is. And I can make the print bigger so I can actually see it, because in a lot of those books, the print is teensy, teensy, tiny, and I don't like that. What tips would you give to someone early on in their Victorian literature journey? So, I have heard a lot of really good tips for this one. And so if you're watching other versions of this tag, take all of their tips. So I'm coming up with one that I have not heard anywhere, and that is the serial app. A lot of Victorian literature, not all of it, but a lot of it was published as serials, like a lot of Dickens was. So it's meant to be almost episodic, but even ones that weren't. So what the serial app is, it's a completely free app. There's times when they might ask you for a tip, but it's completely free to access everything in it. And it has books that are in the public domain, which is everything Victorian literature. And if it's not there, you can request it. And you choose a title, and it will send you, like in the app, it'll send you a chunk of that book every day for so long until you have finished it. That is how I read Middlemarch, because it was so daunting and so huge. That's the way I did it. Now, because it's Middlemarch, it might have that might have been why I had a little bit of trouble with it, and why when I do read it again, it will be actually just reading the book. But I have read other books with it. I read Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer was perfect for it. That's Victorian-ish. I mean, it's not British Victorian, it's American Victorian. I have read a number of classics through them. And again, it's all free. They're all in the public domain. And it just makes them so much more accessible. My one tip with it, though, is I would not recommend any translated literature, because while the book may be in the public domain, translations may not be. So the translation you're going to get may not be the best. But anything that's written in English, or whatever your language is, if you're doing it in a different language, English, it's written in English, you're going to be great with. And it's just a nice, easy way. You can just sit there on your phone and read it. And then you're, 10 minutes later, you've read your chunk, and the next day some more comes. And you are done with Middlemarch, in 5 months. That's how long I think it took me. Number 9. This is our last kind of real question. What is your top recommended read for other readers of Victorian literature? Mine is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Now, everyone says Jane Eyre, and that's why I didn't say Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is also very accessible. I am a Bronte girl, so I'm going to recommend the Brontes. Not going to recommend Wuthering Heights, because it is a tough read, and I understand why a lot of people don't like it. I personally do like it. But I think, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is my favorite. Plus, you can read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall and say, well, I read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. You guys have all just read Jane Eyre. I've read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. It's fantastic. It's very readable. I think actually The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is probably the most readable of the Bronte novels. It is a little bit longer. It's definitely longer than Agnes Grey, but I don't think it's not as long as Shirley and Villette. But it's very readable. So I'm going to say The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, along with Jane Eyre, like everyone else is saying. So those are the questions. The next, the last question is to tag someone. And again, I'm doing this kind of late in the game, and this video is not going to go up for a couple weeks. So I'm a little nervous about tagging anyone specifically. So I'll do the whole, if you've read Victorian literature and you haven't done this tag, please do it. But I'm also going to tag, just in case, I'm going to tag Leandra at Leandra the TBR0. She's my go-to for Golden Age. I don't know if she's read a lot of Victorian. You know, when I tag someone, it's not an obligation to do it. It's just like, maybe this might be a fun tag for you to do. And if this doesn't fit for Leandra, she doesn't have to do it. It's fine. You don't have to, Leandra. It's okay. But she's the one I can think of that might have a really interesting view on it. So yeah, there you go. That's my Victorian literature journey tag. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe next year I'll do the Shakespeare one. Okay. Thank you very much. Anyone I mentioned is tagged below, and the Discord information, please join my Discord because it's easier to talk to people that way. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.